Well, good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Increasing Trial Diversity, Illuminating a New Path to Equitable and Inclusive Clinical Research. My name is Sumaya, and I'll be your X Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved, so please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. We also have handouts available for this presentation, and you can download them through the Handouts tab in your control panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Syneos Health, who developed the content for this presentation. Syneos Health is the only fully integrated biopharmaceutical solutions organization. Syneos, including a contract research organization and contract commercial organization, is purpose-built to accelerate customer performance to address modern market realities. Created through the merger of two industry-leading companies, INC Research and Inventive Health, Syneos brings together approximately 24,000 clinical and commercial minds with the ability to support customers in more than 110 countries. Together, they share insights, use the latest technologies, and apply advanced business practices to speed customers' delivery of important therapies to patients. So now, without further ado, I'd like to hand the mic over to our speakers. So Stephen, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and get started.
Thank you very much, Sumaya. First off, I'd like to say, welcome and thank you very much to all of our viewers and participants for joining us. And we look forward to a lively discussion on a very, very important topic. I just want to make sure that you can all see my screen.
That looks great.
Okay, then as Sumaya indicated, today we're talking about increasing diversity in clinical research and what can be done to try to better engage patients from underrepresented minority communities in this effort. What I'd like to do is to provide some context for what we're talking about today. But looking at what we are doing, this is actually the first kickoff for a four-part dialogue moderated by myself and colleagues from Syneos Health, trying to identify obstacles to appropriate balance of patient diversity in our clinical trials, and to review practical experience-based efforts at trying to achieve the appropriate representation of those patients. Today we'll be doing a deep dive into the background around patient diversity and underlying disparities in the field, and then future presentations on the 3rd of February, 10th of February, and 17th of February will go further into other facets of this issue, and we invite all of you to participate in those webinars. Just to provide some context, I think we're all aware that the United States is very quickly becoming a majority minority country. In 1980, white residents in the United States comprised about 80% of the U.S. population, but by the year 2000, there was significant increase in the representation in the total population among African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, and others. And it's a combination of the white population in the country growing older and not with not as many babies being born, and the exact reverse for minority population. So it's anticipated by about 2040, 2050 that the country will become majority minority. Now, in terms of trying to really focus in on this problem, that is the lack of diversity in clinical trials, over 70% of clinical trial participants right now are white, and this is even higher in cancer studies, whereas the racial and ethnic minorities in the country right now comprise about 40% of the US population. And so, precision medicine is really, a very important tool, and especially in oncology, where 80% of the genomics and related data driving this revolution are derived from Caucasian patients. So there's really a mismatch right there. And less than 5% of trial participants, when you talk about these kinds of novel therapies, are really coming from African American and other minority populations. This is particularly an issue, most recently in terms of, those studies that have been involving the COVID-19 vaccines. The disease incidence in the pandemic is 2 to 3-fold higher among African American and Latino Americans compared to Caucasians, and the mortality is greater than 2-fold higher in these groups. And we really do have to assure appropriate representation in the clinical trials to get a good picture of the efficacy and safety of the vaccines as well as the therapeutics in these populations that are overrepresented among the most hard-hit communities here in the US. We can. So we really do feel that there is an imperative towards increasing patient diversity in clinical research. We've already indicated that diseases and medications impact patients differently based upon their genetic makeup, as well as the socioeconomic environment that they live in. And patient diversity in clinical trials will only occur if we address these fundamental societal flaws in terms of health equity and access to health care. As we just mentioned, pharmacogenetic research reveals significant ethnic and racial differences in drug metabolism, safety, and efficacy. And we already know that, over the last 20 to 30 years, FDA has provided an awful lot of guidance and encouragement to diversify clinical trials to match the population, especially those affected by the particular illnesses. But we really do have to look at what may be necessary to move to encourage the industry and the academic environment to better represent these patients in clinical research. And so with that, I'd like to actually, move forward and go to, introduce, the first of our panelists for this particular webinar. Tasha Johnson is the Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer of the Yale Center for Clinical Investigation, where she provides leadership and direction in clinical research. She's had a great career in academics as well as in consulting, and has been a grant reviewer at NIH, and certainly is one of the best experts in the United States who could speak to this particular issue. And so I'll kind of lob the first question to Tasha, and that is, do you feel that there is an acceptance, a recognition of the need to kind of heighten the effort to diversify patient populations involved in clinical research? And if so, give us your first views on what we should be doing.
So I think that there's been a growing recognition that this is important. Obviously, our understanding and where we are on this issue has changed dramatically since the pandemic and as you said, the disproportionate impact of the disease on underrepresented populations. And so I think that what's happened now is there's always been a focus by those of us who work in the space, as you know, but now there's a heightened awareness by everyone that the only way that we're really going to understand how novel therapeutics or drugs or devices work in populations of color is to have participation in clinical trials. And this has been a huge issue because of just the barriers. There's, as you said, socioeconomic factors, many other things that lead to this disparity in clinical trials participation as well. And until we address some of those fundamental issues, until we also address the issues such as mistrust in not only research but in the healthcare mission, I think we've got a lot of work to do. I think what's happened with COVID, though, to get to the positive spin, what's happened with COVID is everyone's paying attention now. I think that there are some models. We've been quite successful here at Yale with engaging the community, engaging those trusted voices. Our partnership involves the AMEs and Churches of Connecticut and a local Hispanic serving organization called Junta for Progressive Action. And by having those leaders at the table, having them understand the issues related to clinical trials, study design, the regulatory process, all of the issues related to the past issues such as, Henrietta Lacks or Tuskegee, but then understand the regulatory steps that were taken to make sure those things don't happen again, like the IRB process and other things, how informed consent has changed over years. Though that's really, I think, the pathway forward is that level of engagement, that level of knowledge, and then having those trusted leaders be the messenger. And then another pillar that has been very important to us is the use of our electronic health record and platforms that are patient-facing, really maximizing and leveraging those resources. So we're bringing a multi-pronged approach to battle and really thinking about this in every way. And I think that that's really what it's going to require. There's no silver bullet. It's a lot of hard work, a lot of direct engagement, and multiple strategies. And I think that that's really how we have to approach this. And we have to think about this as a community problem. It's not a problem just in medicine or just with the researchers. We've got to address things like the diverse participation of healthcare providers and research teams so that patients are approached by people who look like them, who speak like them, who speak their same language, who can explain things in a way that understands their cultural beliefs and where they come from. I think all of these are strategies that we know to be effective. It's a matter of how we systematize them with organizations like yours, with pharmaceutical companies, with NIH, everyone who has a stake in making this better. Everyone has to be on the same page, and we have to have a broad approach.
Thank you very much for that perspective. That's a good way to get started. And I now see that our other panelist has joined us, Dr. Fabian Sandoval. I know he was involved in a similar presentation over this last hour and a half or thereabouts. Fabian is a physician. He's the CEO and research director at Emerson Clinical Research in the Washington, D.C. area, also a clinician and actively seeing patients. And the last time I saw him on my computer screen, he was running off because a patient had come in. But Fabian is very active and is going to hopefully be able to add to this discussion. And I will kind of take off from what Tasha was just talking about in terms of one part of the effort that we need to to make in terms of increasing the diversity of patients involved in clinical research is actually to go to places where it is easiest to access those patients. It doesn't really, serve to have only sites that are, I'll pick on the DC area and say they're in Chevy Chase, as and quite a little distance away. And so, Fabian, you've been very successful with your particular sites that are in the communities. And can you tell us, what's the secret sauce beyond just location that you have used to be so successful?
So good afternoon. Yes, the secret sauce for us is, like Tasha was saying, there's several approaches, right, to make this perfect sauce. We have to keep adding to it as we go along. And now with COVID, we've had to add more stuff to make this a better sauce. But what does it take? It takes being in the community. It takes going and doing outreach. It also means having the ability to make people learn to trust you, and be honest with patients from the beginning and educating them. Those are the principles behind our level of success, right? So what do? We work with consulates to educate people that are in the community, Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador consulates, because those are the largest populations in our area. We do that every day by educating them and really, literally being in front of them and talking to them about what's going on in health, what are their options for current health care, and what does clinical trials do to help them, if at all. Then we also have been part of a TV show that I started almost 3 years ago that reaches 60,000 viewers every Saturday morning. And it's a great show because we talk about all kinds of diseases. We've done 78 shows by now. We talk about a lot of things in the show, and we take it apart. We talk about community conditions in the disease. We talk to patients, we talk to healthcare providers, we talk to professionals in the field, and we talk about the clinical trials. We also do the same thing with the radio show that we do Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. Right, once again, just letting people know that we're here for them. And then when it talks about trust, Stephen, it's important that I tell patients who are that their legal status might be in question. I tell them from the beginning, I don't care about your legal status. I'm never going to ask you about your legal status. Come to us. We're a place of trust. And for everyone as a whole, I say to them, I don't care if you have insurance or not, because you're coming into a location where insurance is not an issue. There's no cost. And also, if you don't have a way to get to us, don't worry. I will send you transportation at no cost to you if you need to get here early. If you need to get here by 5 a.m., I'll make sure staff is here by 5 a.m., right? If you need breakfast, I'll have breakfast for you after we've drawn your blood, right? So we make sure that patients know that they're in a safe environment. And that's it. That's all it takes to do that. And we say to that from the moment we pick up the phone and talk to them, from the time we do something on the TV show or the radio show, we tell them these things up front so that they know they're in a safe place, and that if insurance is not an issue, it's not an issue. And then we have a community clinic that sees patients that are uninsured. We don't have this sliding scale because unfortunately or fortunately, we don't receive any other subsidies because I don't have the time to go look for additional subsidies. So the clinic kind of just holds itself up, by the grace of God, and just enough money to cover overhead costs. But everyone pays the same. It's really expensive if they need to come in to see a provider, and then they're part of the research institute from the beginning.
So Fabian, listening to you, and thank you for that kind of overview. What we have found as a CRO is that people are always saying, well, okay, tell me the one thing that we should do to solve this problem. And then then they'll often kind of come up with something. Well, if I make sure that there's somebody who speaks Spanish at the site, is that going to be sufficient? And I'm going to take from what you just said, that's not sufficient. Tasha, what are some of the other things that we should be involved in and should provide to be able to facilitate the enrollment of these patients and keep them in studies?
So I think that's a really interesting point, and I think there's several things. So as Fabian said, the most important thing is meeting the participant where they are. When we are looking at participation in trials that, let's say we write, our investigators write to NIH, we have full control over those studies. So we can include things like transportation, we can include things like EHR queries, we can include things like health fairs or events, because this is how we know we can get to those patients. When we participate in a trial that's, say, sponsored by an industry partner or run through a CRO, we get a nice little recruitment guide, which, you know, might have some advertisements for newspapers and things like that, or some social media ads, but those might also not work in our community. And so I think one of the things to think about is flexibility in the approach. And also thinking about having really knowledgeable, I think the typical model is to have patient advisors sometimes participate in the process after there's a protocol design and things like that, but having someone who actually has that community knowledge, because there's a different thing between like the disease access as opposed to broad community access. Have them engaged at the stage of design, ahead of development of recruitment strategies, because we'll end up with a better product. The one thing that we've figured out from our work is when our cultural ambassadors are engaged and they give us that guidance and advice early on, we can have high numbers of participants in our trial who are underrepresented. Our highest, I think, is about 92%. So they know their community, they know what their community needs, they know what a good protocol looks like now that they've had the training. I think what we've got to get to is in the industry, the broad industry, is a comfort level that they bring a set of expertise to the table just as a biostatistician. And if they're involved at the same stage that you might involve a biostatistician, we would be more successful on the back end. So I think it takes a little bit of turning our model on the head. Instead of asking for this data on the back end, which typically happens when we don't get the numbers that we're looking for in total accrual or the numbers of percentage accrual, then everyone, let's call a meeting, let's bring additional sites, let's start thinking about a strategy at that point. When the reality is the time to think about the strategy is before there's a final protocol. So I think that there are things like that that we really just, if we want to get serious about the problem, we have to start thinking about those approaches.
Now, it's very kind of refreshing to hear you talking about we need to focus on this at the beginning where, you know, protocols are developed, well before we get to site selection, well before we talk about, you know, the first patient is coming in next week, kind of, or anticipated to come in next week. On the question of protocols, what are some of the, you know, kind of problems that you've seen in protocols coming in either from academic or from commercial sponsors that, you know, might present barriers, and that, you know, those writing the protocols might not be aware that these are issues? Fabian, I'll let you start on that one first.
My staff is going to be happy you asked me that question. So probably the one of the easiest limiting factors that we get stuck with is BMI, right? Sometimes the BMI is really strict on some of these studies, right? If we're looking at inclusion criteria for studies, that would, just by a few points, could really change a patient. And sometimes BMI isn't really a good reflector, because you can have a male or female who goes to the gym all the time and they're just ripped with muscles, and because of the BMI issue won't let them qualify, right? And it's got nothing to do with their health status. It's also sometimes the amount of follow-up visits or the length of a visit. We try to go as fast as we can on some of these visits, but some of those visits take a long time. And that means we're not compensating the patient for being there, if they're even allowed to stay that long, go away from work for that long of time. Is sometimes the visits can become very complicated. Sometimes we have survey questions that have to be done that kind of take a lot of time. And sometimes those surveys are not meaningful, or they're not translated appropriately, so that adds to the time. So sometimes being able to split up a visit and still allowing for a patient to be randomized is important, but if it takes 3 hours for a visit, we're losing patients. You know, sometimes we have patients that, you know, we have it in the office for 6 hours. And those are kind of the dilemmas that we're faced in. Can we bring this patient in? And I mean, we can't bend over backwards anymore for our patients when they come in for those long visits. So keeping those things in mind are important.
And Stephen, if I could just add to that, you highlighted the very specific issue of early phase trials in oncology and the issues there. I think just by the design of most early phase oncology trials, we've eliminated anyone who of a certain socioeconomic status because some of the visits are really long. PK visits, things like that. We're looking at 15-hour PKs in some of the studies now. So when you think about it, that's not only the time that we're having the participant themselves be out of work and with us. There's transportation on both sides. You also think about families who might live in multi-generational households. So the person participating in the trial might be a caregiver for someone else who has to go to work. So you're impacting, kind of two sets of incomes in this activity. And then you've got these other ancillary issues of transportation and other things that Fabian mentioned. And so it's really the trial design itself is a selection criteria that prohibits a certain segment of the population from participating. And then I'd say another thing that we found, especially in our work with EHR and understanding how to use that tool to support what we want to do in terms of the sort of democratizing the offer for studies. I think that what happens, a lot of our faculty might look at a patient or their profile or, the fact that they're taking care of their grandkids or something and make a judgment that they don't have the time, that the trial would be a burden. But by making the offers through the EHR, what we're finding is minority participants, as the data generally shows, are just as willing to participate in clinical trials if they're asked, and if we can accommodate these other issues. And so we're seeing this higher percentage of underrepresented minorities who are responding between midnight and 4 a.m. saying, yes, I'd love to hear about that clinical trial. The problem is generally no one's at the center. Maybe Fabian and his team are there at midnight and answering the phone, but that's not typically the time you can find a study coordinator in the center and available to answer the questions. And so again, I think it's about this model. We've got to rethink our model to be available and meet the patients and the participants where they are at the time that they're ready to consider for a study. And we've got to be ready with all of these wraparound services, thinking about these wraparound services. We have to have IRB models and regulatory models that gets us the flexibility that it's not about coercion. It's actually about creating clinical trials equity. And I think that that's a conversation that we need to have. We need to partner with the IRBs to make sure they understand it, partner with the pharmaceutical companies so they understand these different budget lines that we're trying to get to that really provides equitable access as opposed to inappropriate incentives.
Okay, you've given us a lot to think about. But it's interesting because we are, I mean, as a CRO, we're fully aware of some of the kind of large time-consuming requirements that have been included in protocols. However, putting on the hat of, kind of not only just representing the industry, but having been on that side of the table, if in fact the regulatory requirements are for, let's say, PK over 6 or 8 hours, how do we solve that issue? Because I totally understand it from both sides, and that's pretty difficult. And you can be involved in initial discussions, but
You can't. You just have to accommodate. I mean, that's part of the long 2-hour consenting process, right? And the consenting process is not just a 15-minute thing, right? It takes a while. So that's part of the kind of the Jedi mind trick that you have to talk to patients about to say, this is good, and you're going to have to be here for 8 hours. Please say yes, right? And if there's a good reason for the study, then they're going to say yes, because their heart is in the right place. If the fact that the patient sitting in front of you already talking to you about the study, that's half the battle. But we have to accommodate. We just have to make the space, make the time, get more staff involved. But Stephen, I actually have a question for you, my friend. when a sponsor comes to you guys as a CRO, do you as a CRO ask them these questions ahead of time? Do you prepare for some of these diversity questions, and do consent forms already, is that like a checklist that you guys are looking at to say, are you thinking about having stuff in 2 languages? And is that something that's being discussed with the sponsors?
Fabian, and then just, full disclosure, I did not offer that question up to you for us to be able to respond to. I did not. I didn't, promise I didn't. But at Syneos, we are actively encouraging all of our medical directors to actually take the responsibility when we get, an initial protocol, final protocol or protocol synopsis, to be able to ask those questions to say, wait a minute, we need to allow more time, or we need to oversample particular populations because the epidemiology of the disease is such that we should. To give an example, and I will not disclose the sponsor company, there was one that I have spoken to that on their COVID-19 vaccine with thousands of patients enrolled 2 African Americans. 2. And afterwards, they recognized it. But I said, wait a minute, moving forward, we really have to be sensitive to this. And there's a lot of things that we can do. And that's before site, so before site selection, before, finishing the protocol. But, I like to think that we at Syneos, and, there are others in the CRO industry, and certainly some of the big sponsor companies are becoming more sensitive to these issues and the need to address these questions to provide solutions that work well before we get to first patient in. So the answer, the short answer is we are doing the best that we possibly can,
Right.
but it's an uphill climb both within our organization, within the rest of the CRO world, and certainly among a majority of the sponsor companies, although there are those that are really getting it and pushing us in this particular area. So we are on the same side on this.
That's wonderful. And sorry, I didn't mean to throw that question. I think I've been doing so much interviews and stuff on things that I'm just used to asking questions. So.
No, and that is no problem, because these are important issues for all of us that are engaged in the clinical research effort to be able to, really provide the best medicines for the right populations, ask the right questions, and get it done efficiently and to the highest quality.
Right.
Yeah, we're all responsible in this. Yes.
Did I cut you off, Tasha?
No, I was just gonna say, Stephen, your point is well taken about the regulatory side, but I think the role that we can play in really kind of moving this is the conversation with the IRB. And I'll give a specific example. We had a study recently that we're running, and we looked at the demographics of our participation and we're concerned. And so we called a consult with our community advisors. We explained the protocol, we talked about it, and we have these very honest conversations about compensation, all kinds of things. And so they looked at the study. They looked at the activities that were associated with the specific visit, and they said, your compensation isn't aligned. It's not really, you're asking a lot for what you're giving. And you need to go back to the sponsor and you need to say, this isn't coercion. When you factor in this level of transportation, how long they're going to be at the site. This was happened to be a COVID positive study. People aren't going to be feeling well. And then the IRB had a question about it. It was actually at a commercial IRB. Our local IRB had a question about it. They helped us do an assessment. We wrote to the central IRB that was responsible for the study. Here's the assessment by our community. Here's the assessment by our local IRB. Think that this higher request for compensation is not coercive, but in fact commiserate with what we're asking them to do, and we were able to make that change. But it was a lot of extra work on our part, on the part of the PI, to make sure that we do that. And I think that that's what we have to do right now until everyone's thinking gets caught up with where we are, is we have to go the extra mile to convince both the sponsor that this is a stipend that's worth paying and why. We have to work with the IRBs to help them understand, with people who are educated from the community, about coercion, the balance between coercion, and just making sure that we're being appropriate so that we're not limiting access by providing stipends that aren't doable for what we're asking them to do. And so I think that there are things like that we need to think about. And in the oncology space, even thinking about things like overnight stays, when we're asking someone to do 15 or 18 hours in the clinic, and then they're tired, they're weak, they're sick, maybe it should be that we have a night's hotel stay or something like that that's planned, that's a part of how we compensate for the fact that they've got transportation issues. So just being more flexible in how we look at that compensation model for supporting recruitment and the stipend for the participant.
I think those are all very, very good points that we really do need to incorporate into our routines of looking at greater flexibility and the impact of participation on patients and research subjects. Getting back to something, you just mentioned community members, and there's actually a question that's come in from everybody, out 71 people who are listening right now. And that is, what is the best way for community members to best help the formal institutions that are involved in clinical research, such as the hospitals, sites, CROs, universities, et cetera? How can those community members and community organizations best kind of help and facilitate recruitment, education, and become clinical trial advocates?
So I think that's been a critical element for us, and I'd say the biggest thing is education. And if our community leaders were here, that's what they would say. It's a principle of their program. You have to have the education, but not just the education from the community point of view that you bring to the table. You have to go the extra mile as a community partner to understand research. So oftentimes we have our community leaders meet with sometimes even our sponsors as we're considering a study. And when they do that, they don't ask questions like, if there's a protocol, we're one of 40 sites, they know our position. We're not changing the protocol at this point in the phase 3 study when we're in the second wave of sites. They understand that walking in the door, so they're not saying, let's take out visits 2 through 5. So I think it's a matter of understanding really that whole study design, understanding placebo, understanding all of those kinds of things, understanding the regulatory process, what you can ask for in a protocol, why certain things are specific safety requirements by the FDA, so that you can come to the table as a knowledgeable partner, ready to contribute, ready to think about how we might change the space. And that's a big obligation, but it's not all on the community. There's a big obligation on the part of the academic centers, the hospitals, the community-based clinics, because you have to be open-minded and you have to know that the community leaders are coming to the table as equal partners, and that they bring an expertise that you do not have and you need to be successful. And so it's a matter of, there's hard work to do on both sides to get to an equitable partnership that's going to move the needle in the space. And I know Fabian knows that because he does it every day.
I know, and I was about to pitch this to Fabian because I can understand and certainly confident that the let's just community groups, from straight community organizations to churches and some other institutions where people trust. But do you think that those organizations should be engaged to go beyond encouraging patients to come to Emerson, for instance, to participate in a trial, and say, yes, there are other sites that you could go to, and it's important, and those community organizations kind of provide that message in a community, but also engage the site to actually come to those meetings to say, here's what you should be doing, and we're advocating on your behalf. And so, you know, I know it's tough to get to Potomac, but there's an opportunity. Fabian, am I being too idealistic on this?
No, and we do one of those things. There's a organization called Uptown Main Street, which is a nonprofit in the DC metro area, where we already engaged with them, and they have the ear of all the small business leaders in Northwest DC that are owned by minority individuals, so that they tell them what's going on, and we actually have done events where we've talked to them about a variety of healthcare issues, tons of COVID discussions. So we go out to them, and then they in turn tell patients about what we're doing here. And I have not I haven't had the privilege of going in front of a church to do the same thing, but I know Tasha has. I know Tasha's actually, gotten on the pulpit afterwards and given her 2 cents about diversity and why our community needs to be engaged with that. And that's the level that we haven't done. We haven't engaged the churches in that form. We have brought in church leaders, and a lot of the churches have the health ministry individuals who have come to our office, and we've engaged them and talked to them, and we gave them a whole presentation about the different things that we can do for their communities, and they have referred patients themselves that way. So as long as you train a good leader, it works really well for us in that sense. And the next stage is to follow in Tasha's footsteps and actually get the privilege to speak in front of the congregation.
It took us quite a while to get to the point that they invited us into the pulpit, but we did. We actually launched our partnership is, I'll say, it's a deep partnership. We're well over 10 years into our partnership now, and it took us about 9 months to make it to the pulpit with a deep partnership. But I'd say we go a step further. Our community leaders are actually at the table helping us set priorities. So we actually do a joint prioritization process with them at least once a year, but in COVID, I feel like we're doing it every month. What are the priorities? What are the areas you want to work on? And then we actually do go. So a lot of our events are organized by the church in the church or at one of the sites that they select in the community. Even now in COVID, most of our stuff is virtual, but we've gone the step to make sure that we're in the senior citizen centers with them, where we're purchasing iPads and teaching the seniors how to do a virtual visit and how to sign up and build a research profile, so they take it to the next level. But we're right there beside them, and it's not all about the trials. I think that's the other important piece that Fabian referenced. You have to be there for more than just sign up for a clinical trial. When they have a health fair and they want nurses to come and participate in that, or they have, Black History Month and they want to talk about heart disease, you've got to be there for that. If they have a code and food drive, you've got to be there for that. So it's about really being there as a true partner that's not based on a single study. It has to be something that's sustainable. And that's why I said there's work on both sides. If you want a sustainable partnership that really moves the needle, you have to have that commitment on both sides.
Very, very good. Okay, now for those, kind of investigators who are in various places, and even out to Cumberland, Maryland, or in, Westport, Connecticut, how do they learn from you other than tuning in to radio shows, TV shows, or participating in panels like this? How can they best learn about how they can do a better job in terms of recruiting a more diverse patient population?
Well, let me tell you what happened when I went to, so I'm engaged with the National Hispanic Medical Association. And before COVID hit, we would have our conferences. We have done presentations at the conference at NHMA, and we had good presenters. And in our room, the first time we did it, year one, there was maybe about 30, 40 people in the room, and that was with the director of the National Institutes of Minority Health and Health Disparities, Eliseo Perez Estable. Dr. Eliseo was there with me presenting, and I had one of my PIs. it was a decent turnout. The following year, a new crowd of people, I think we ended up having just like a little round table because I think 4 people showed up. That's horrible. That was heartbreaking. That says that doctors themselves don't always find the interest to do it. So it is a challenge to engage them. So I think doctors need to be, and all healthcare providers need to be engaged on this while they're still in school. As we get them up, developing them into providers of health, they need to hear about research and the importance within the school setting. And I believe Tasha makes their residents do like city training program and stuff, right?
Yeah, we've moved to a model where we're doing a lot more training. We're actually working with the dean now to look at the med school curriculum. We're working with the dean of School of Public Health to look at the regulatory curriculum that's a part of the MPH program. So that is a part of our strategy, get them really early in their career. For those who are well beyond that point, though, I think that there's 2 things. As Fabian said, this idea of really engaging the healthcare providers, not just the physicians, though, the healthcare providers at all stages. We partnered with the FDA, the Office of Minority Health and Health Equity, and we did a presentation about these issues with the Black Nurses Society. So I think Fabian's right, and he and I have been talking about this for a while. How do we partner with those professional societies and make it relevant? But it can't be a one-day engagement. In order to be successful and not be a one-time, 1572 signer, you've got to really understand how to integrate clinical research in the practice the way Fabian does and know how to do that in a regulatorily compliant way, which you're not going to get in a 2-day boot camp only. So we've got to change the training model for that. I think the other thing, as I said, like I truly believe, again, there's no silver bullet. We all have to be working at this every day. So another thing is the IRBs. And so what we have done at our institution, and even with the stuff that goes out to our commercial IRB partners, at our local IRB and our Human Subject Protection Program, they're well aware. They're actually a part of training our ambassadors. The IRB chair and the HRPP director do 12 hours of the community training curriculum, so they know these community partners. But when they're reviewing a protocol, if they don't think that there's an appropriate plan to enroll diverse participants and they're concerned about this population or they're concerned about the study, they actually do a referral and say, you need to go and meet with the ambassadors and you need to get input on this protocol. And they'll literally hold the protocol and have a question that requires answer by the IRB until they know that they've had that consult. So I think that there are ways to make sure that everyone who has a part in this process understand that they have a role to play, and then help them play it with the knowledge of how to do it, and make sure that we've got the partners at the table, like the community partners, that they understand that's a role they can play for the IRBs.
That's important. That's Tasha, and I'm going to come back to you on in terms of kind of partnerships and something that you mentioned about small business. But just as an aside, Fabian, glad to hear that you talked about the National Hispanic Medical Association. Elena Rios was one of my students.
No kidding.
Yes, at UCLA when I was, resident, fellow, and faculty member. And so, we always, whenever I see her at various meetings, it's always good to reminisce when she was considerably younger and I wasn't as old. Let's put it that way. But going back to Tasha, it's interesting you talked about small business because we at Syneos have begun discussions with, it was very surprising to me, with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that has indicated that they want to, get involved in encouraging greater diversity in clinical research. What should we tell them? What should we ask for?
So it's interesting that you raise this. One of our ministers, right after George Floyd, everyone was being reflective, and he is the minister of the only Black church in his town in Connecticut, and so everyone was coming to him asking him what we should do, and he pointed everyone to the diversity initiative. So he gave everyone, the folks from the city, the fire department, he's given everyone a job to help him move diversity. So first he decided we needed to tackle making sure everyone understood how important the flu shot was this year because of COVID and flu as a combination. Then he moved the efforts to, we've got a COVID clinical trial coming, here's everyone's role. So I think it's a matter of thinking about what the need is in the community and how that organization or business or advocacy agency can play a part in it. And that's really, I think, where the community leaders come in, because that's not my expertise. What I say is I know research. I've been doing research forever. What they know is community. So the second that we get one of those requests, I sit down with the reverends and I say, this group wants to be at the table. What do you think they can do to help us? And let's understand, and then the other thing that we're really big on is if it's not a win-win partnership, we know it's probably not sustainable, because at some point they're going to move on to whatever the next cause is unless they see a win-win. So every partnership we look at, we're looking at what's the sustainability of this partnership? What do they get out of it? What do they want out of it? What do we get out of it? What do we want out of it? And then we approach it from that point of view. So that's what I would say is, who's the partner? What sit down with the partner and describe honestly what you want out of it, and make sure everyone stay true to that process. And if it really is, I want something to say so my company can have a diversity statement and we can feel good about it, it should be said, because that's an important part. If you're honest with the community, then they respect that. They want to know, because they'll suspect that anyway. So just say it. You get the respect and you work around that as what you want to get out of the partnership. And they're going to tell you what they need or want out of it. And then that's when you start down the road for something that's truly sustainable.
That's great information, Tasha. Thank you for that perspective. It's important. One question that's come in from one of the attendees relates to something that I think Fabian, you mentioned, and that is a lot of organizations, both governmental, non-governmental companies, have come out with documents and guidance and presentations and stuff like that, and that's including ASCO and some of the others, or kind of specialty groups, the internists, even the surgeons. It's amazing. How effective do you think that those statements are in terms of trying to move the needle? And what else do those organizations need to do?
Like Tasha said, just be honest with what they want to really do. A statement's not going to do anything unless you put a team behind it. And it's disheartening when I see these types of statements, and then it's disheartening when I see different level of sponsors, CROs that say they want to do it, but then they assign it to one individual, or they give like a half FTE to someone, or the lone ranger out there that wants to do good and says, I don't care, I'm going to take this on an additional kind of duty as a, without being assigned, I'm going to be the diversity person. And then it's an uphill battle just for them alone, right? These organizations that want to do something need to do something about it and really put a decent team to move this forward, right? Put 5 people on it to actually try to make a real team to make something of this diversity movement, and then stick to something and don't reinvent the wheel. There's lots of societies and organizations that are trying to do something with diversity, so don't reinvent the wheel. Find out who they are, partner up with them, and make things happen, right? SCRS is doing something, ACRP is doing something, ACRO is doing something, Transcelerate was doing something, but they're all kind of these little widgets and pieces. Pharma companies are doing something, but we're not together, right? Was it 2 years ago at Yale, they brought in this great group of people because they saw Yale as a good ship to kind of drive this forward and consolidate information. And we had great sponsors, great CROs wanting to do something, and things started to move forward because there just needs to be one beacon that kind of hones them all in, right? We just need to be that one blue light as flies kind of go to, but we need a beacon, and that's what this beacon is. That's kind of what Yale's trying to do, and I'm glad Syneos is trying to do the same thing, because if we don't bind together and get all these organizations. It's just another pretty paper that says we're doing diversity and they're not.
That sounds very familiar in terms of discussions that have taken place, and I'm glad to hear it from you. Now, I think we have about 5 more minutes on the schedule, and kind of your perspectives on, for both of you, where we should be in 5 years relative to diversity in clinical research, and where you think we will be. One is aspirational, the other's more practical.
So
Tisha, go for it. Okay.
I think we should be. I'm sorry, Tasha. I'll let you go first.
No, go ahead, Fabian.
I'm sorry, I'm so rude.
That's all right.
We should be at 50%, right? Of patients that are coming in should be a beverage orientation, right? To bring it in. The truth is, if we get to 25%, it'll be good. Even 20%, right? But that is the reality. I think about 20% is what's going to be. I would expect it to be 50%, but it's a hard challenge because there is no carrot and stick. It's just the right thing to do. It's us as being good scientists. It's us as being good sites, being good sponsors to move this forward. So it's a matter of doing the right thing because we know it's the right thing to do. And I think before my last comment, and then I'll hand it over to Tasha, is what are people going to take away from this, right? There's 67 people left on the call. What are they going to do now, right? It's work with the communities, work with your sites, work with your sponsors. Reach out to make at least one meaningful change. And there's lots of changes, and you guys can call me individually, and I'll give you examples of one meaningful change that can work to make an improvement. But if you don't decide and put something to action, it's just going to stay there as a beautiful thought. Ma'am.
So,
Tasha, your turn.
Yeah, I should have taken my turn and gone before Fabian. He's always a hard act to follow. But I do agree with Fabian. This idea of everything you should do, everything you want to do should be actionable. And what I would say is where we can be, if we take advantage of the moment and not forget the moment. Right now, everyone is paying attention to this issue of diversity in clinical trials because of COVID. So make sure that any investments that happen right now in this moment, because we're here, are sustainable investments, not one-off approaches that are specific to a single trial, a single approach that won't get us anything that's lasting or meaningful. So the thing that I would say is my hope is that we can all take advantage of the attention that's laser focused right now, build in sustainability models. So when we're 5 years down the road, everything that we did right now to support COVID, to support a change in COVID, is supporting diabetes and heart and cardiovascular disease and oncology. And we're moving that needle. It might not get us to Fabian's 50%. My hope is it will, but that's the only way we're going to get there. If each one of these investments are siloed investments where we're only thinking, as Fabian said, in our bubble, and we're not thinking about how we collaborate with across all of these organizations, that we have all of the stakeholders at the table to talk about a solution, we're going to be right here again in 5 years talking about the next issue and how we miss this opportunity to be impactful.
An excellent point to end up on. It is now 1 o'clock on the East Coast. And, I really want to express my very sincere appreciation to Tasha and Fabian for participating. Fabian, thank you for jumping from one call to another earlier today. On behalf of my colleagues at Syneos, we look forward to working with both of you as we move forward, because we are in this, we are serious, because this is going to benefit patients and their families and their communities and the US and other countries as a whole. That's the perspective we have. Samaya, I'll turn it back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you everyone for that very insightful webinar. That was really interesting. So audience members, thank you for all those questions. And if you do have further questions, you can quickly go ahead and jot these email addresses down as well. So go ahead and quickly jot those down. And again, thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. So a survey window will be popping up on your screens. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us improve our webinars. Now, I'm about to send you a link in your chat box. You'll be able to view the recording of this event on this page, and you can also share this link with your colleagues when they register for the recording here as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers, Dr. Stephen Keith, Dr. Fabian Sandoval, and Tasha Johnson for that fantastic and insightful presentation. We hope you found this conference informative. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.